Hi, everybody. It's Maker Monday today. I am Kris Bakke, and I am the luckiest person in the world to be able to serve art educators around the United States. And I can't believe it's the second Monday in August already. And I know that you're crazy getting ready for back to school, however that may look for you. We actually are going to have a survey at the end that asks a little bit about that. The information that you give us helps us to serve you. And if there's suggestions that you have, whether it's about this Maker Monday or about products you purchase from us or kits or anything like that, we always want to hear from you. So today I am excited because I have one of my favorite home peeps, and I say home peeps because Angie Szabo is a high school art teacher here in Fort Atkinson. Angie is also an artist, as many of you are as well, and I love her perspective as an artist who also teaches art, because she shares that with lots of her students and gives them sort of that additional look of how does this look coming from a professional artist. And so she has a great lesson plan for us and some great tips. And I just want to welcome you, Angie, and thank you so much for being here. I will talk a little bit more about what's coming with the at the end of the webinar, but let's get started and make some art with Angie. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, thank you, Kris. Thank you for having me. Nice earrings, by the way. You're wearing some Angie Szabo
Oh
earrings.
my gosh, yes.
Did you even plan that?
So on purpose, because I wanted to say in the world, I'm so glad you said it because I totally spaced. But these earrings are enameled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Enameled earrings of Angie's, and they are definitely a prized possession. And I specifically wore them because when I said Angie was an artist, I was going to say, and notice my beautiful earrings that I have on today. And then I spaced because I get so excited. So yes, I'm so glad you said that. And then it took a minute to resonate. So welcome to Monday.
That's totally fine. Totally fine. I'm so glad that you guys have me here today. I'm excited to share some of my experiences with you transitioning to online, which I know all art teachers right now have struggled and are struggling with, and then to share a really easy project for kids to do at home. That's 3D, and I know that's another area that art teachers are struggling with, is how do I transition my 3D curriculum to at home spaces.
Right.
So it's been a challenge. It'll continue to be a challenge, and we're certainly going to learn a lot along the way. And what I have found really helpful is that everybody helps each other. So I'll start by sharing a little bit with you guys about who I am. As Kris said, my name is Angie Szabo. I teach in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin at the high school. I've been there about 10 years, a little less than that. I've been teaching for 16 years, and I've taught grades 5th grade through 12th. I've taught 2D art and 3D art. And I'm also an artist, and I'm a mom, and it's hard to balance all of those things. But it's really worthwhile because they all kind of connect and intertwine. And I find it's really important for me to continue to practice my art as I believe it role models for my high school students. And it kind of fulfills a need kind of deep inside my soul, but it all intertwines together. So last March, my school went from in-person to online over the course of a weekend. We had 2 weeks before we went full online. But we had to figure out how to make that transition. I teach drawing, AP art seminar, which is an independent study course, art metals and fibers, and sculpture. Drawing's a little bit easier to transition to an at-home environment. My AP art and art seminar kids are seniors with a lot of art under their belt, so they tend to have a lot of art supplies at home, very self-directed. And my sculpture and my metals classes were kind of the more difficult ones to figure out how to transition at home because my kids hadn't brought materials home for the most part. They left on a Friday, assumed they were coming back on a Monday, and never came back. So I had to come up with some different lessons than typical, but I also wanted to stay kind of on brand with the classes that they were in. So one of the lessons that I came up with was using a soda can like this to make earrings. And we did earrings just because they're pretty easy. You can come get ear wires off of old earrings or at Goodwill pretty simply, but earrings like this. And I like that project because if I started a metals class online, this is something that I could start with to teach design and also some basic metalworking concepts, even though it's on aluminum and not copper, brass, or sterling silver. We're not using heat. They're still learning about how to work with metals. So I felt like it was a good transition. One of the things that I had to learn to work with moving to online is some video tutorials. And for years, I wanted to do video tutorials, but every time I thought about it or got close to doing it, I was like, oh, I'm just too busy. I don't have time to learn this. I don't have time to make this. I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. It works. And it did, it worked fine. But when I went online, it was really hard to do a good demo with my kids on Zoom Live. I teach high school. A lot of my kids were working because they needed the income for their families because parents were laid off. Sometimes kids slept in because they didn't require school. So by making the videos, I could effectively teach kids that were with me in time. But I could also teach my students that weren't able to come to class in that moment. And so I set up some spaces at my house to do some video instruction. The most helpful tool that I got was a Gooseneck phone mount. Okay, so this is the Gooseneck phone mount. I'll tip my computer here. It connects to a like a clamp on my table. It's got a nice long arm, and then my phone, I can just clip in here. I can have it plugged in. I can clip it in, and I can do video straight down, which for art, doing that straight down shot is really important. I got that on Amazon. There's a lot of them on Amazon. But for me, that was really, really helpful. So I used my phone and the Gooseneck to record video. And then my phone's an iPhone, my computer's a Mac. I could just airdrop my video to my Mac, and then on my Mac I used iMovie to edit. There's a ton of video editing out there. iMovie, there's I think a little bit more of a learning curve. There's some really simple video tutorial or video production apps out there and programs that you can get on a computer that are probably a little easier to learn than iMovie, but I used iMovie a little bit before, so I had a base, and I just started to make tutorials. I think my biggest critic was my 4th grade daughter, who every time I made a video would critique it and tell me what I didn't do well, which was great. But I feel like she helped me in some ways in thinking about how to make them look more professional. And I wanted to make videos that other people could use, that I could continue to use over and over again. But I also have great art teacher friends. My colleague, Frank Korb, is a huge advocate of the one and done video. Just record it in the moment, finish it, post it, don't worry about the editing. And there's a million ways that you can approach stuff. I will likely this year be teaching both in person and online at the same time. So I might need to start using a little bit more of Frank's advice and just take the video, post it, be done, move on, instead of taking my more perfectionistic stance and like, well, I need a good intro and I should probably add music and all the different things that make, for a nice long video to have in the long run. But, it all depends on what you're wanting to do, how much time you have, and what works for you. What I like about making videos is that even when all of this is over, and I have hope that it will be over and we'll return to normal. I know normal will be different, but I know at some point we're going to be back in our classrooms with our students on a daily basis. What I like about having this backlog of recorded demos is when my kids are sick, when they're gone, when they're going on a family trip and they miss a section of class, I've got these videos that I can share with them and say, hey, you know what, you missed my soldering demo, go to Google Classroom, click on this link, or go to my YouTube channel and look up my metals videos and I want you to watch the soldering video. So when kids miss instruction, they have something to fall back on. Or if I have a sub on a day I was supposed to do a demo, the demo can still happen. The class can watch the video and move forward, even though I'm not in the class to teach that demo. So there's a lot of benefits to recording video beyond just the fact that we're in quarantine, or may or may not be in quarantine right now. We might have kids online, we might not. It's definitely something that I would encourage you to try. Keep in mind there's a learning curve, and if you've never done it before, give yourself some grace. It'll get easier and it'll go faster the more you do it. Try not to be too perfectionistic like I had been, because I think it makes the video process longer than it needs to be, although it's kind of fun to learn new stuff. There's a handout that Kris is going to attach or send to y'all that has my contact information if you need it. It also has my YouTube channel. I don't have a ton of videos there yet, but I started. The lesson that I'm going to teach you today, the soda can earrings, is a 15-minute tutorial on YouTube under Angie Szabo Design. So if you want to watch the tutorial again, or if it's something you want to do with your students and you want to use that for instruction, it's there for you. It's super easy, it's fun, and it's easy to modify for different age groups and levels. And yeah, I don't know, try making videos. I think it's worth it. You know, do a little one at first and then try again. And some of you are like pros at videos and are probably like, gee, Angie, move on. I get it, I've done this. So I'm gonna move on. Soda can jewelry. So the first thing you gotta do is drink a can of soda. I had one student when we did this, they used a beer can, but in the end, one did not drink the beer can, it was their parents, but you couldn't see like the Budweiser or whatever logo on it in the end. And so I figure, you know, whatever cans they have available to them can work. Have them drink the soda, rinse it out, let it dry a little bit. When you start working, anytime you work in metals, you want to make sure you talk about safety first, just like any kind of medium where there's a safety concern. When I'm cutting the soda can is the dangerous part as far as like getting cut or having issues. So what you're going to tell your students, or what you would do yourself, is you need to wear safety goggles or glasses. If they don't have safety goggles or glasses available, they can wear sunglasses as long as they can see. You just want to have some kind of eye covering. I've cut these soda cans multiple times now. I've never had metal fly, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't wear safety goggles. The second thing safety-wise you want to talk about, they're going to cut sheets of their soda cans. This itself, I do this, I'm not going to get cut. It's if I run my finger along the edge. And if you're like me, when I did this, you went, ugh. But if I take my finger, I push and I run it along the edge, then I might cut my finger. So the other thing I would talk to my students is just being careful when you grab the metal or to touch it, not to pull along the length of the metal. The last safety thing is when you're done cutting the metal, you want to use like a damp paper towel and just kind of wipe your area up a little bit. If there's any little shards of metal, that should kind of pull them off the surface so you don't cut yourself. So step number one after safety is you take your soda can. We've got to cut it open. I have an awl that I'm going to use for this. And like most of you, I have the luxury of having a lot of art supplies. We're in my art studio right now. There's a light. Over there is my metals desk where I have a lot of tools that I need for this. Students might not have this at home. If you're doing this with them at home, they can just use a pin or a thumbtack or a skewer, the end of a scissors. But what you're going to do is right below the bevel in the can, because you don't want to cut up here, you want to cut below. You're going to pop a hole in the side of your can. And I usually open it up a little bit. Then I'm going to take my scissors. I'm going to put the scissors in the hole, kind of wiggle them around, and then you're going to cut right beneath that bezel. I'm going to go faster than I normally do. If I go fast, I'm going to have sharper edges. If I go slow, I can control it more. But I want to cut the top of this off. Just fell on the floor. And then I'm going to cut down the back where the nutritional label is, just in case you want to use the fun front. Cut down the back. And then I'm going to cut around the bottom. Now in this step, sorry for the horrible noises. in this step, this is where you have sharp edges. You guys can see there's some metal that's kind of twisted off the edge. So once you've cut this sheet out, what I always do is I'm going to go around with my scissors and I'm just going to do some nice smooth cutting, and I'm going to trim those edges. If I trim those off, then my cut hazard is really low at this point. Okay, so now if you look at the same edges, it's pretty smooth. There's no jagged pieces kind of coming off. One modification teachers might want to make, depending on the age group that you're working with, is you could pre-cut cans for kids. Now, if you've got 20 kids in a class, cutting 20 cans is not a big deal. If you've got 300 fifth graders or something, you're probably not going to want to pre-cut your cans. So you really got to think about, is this appropriate for the age level and the students that I'm teaching? If not, there's some other modifications I'll talk about, but that's one. You could pre-cut the cans depending on how many kids you have and how much time you want to put into that. So we've got a nice smooth can. The next step for me with kids is really working on design and taking a look at, you know, I did earrings. Maybe you want to do necklaces. You want them to string something around the neck. Maybe you want to do earrings like I've done, but looking at some images of what other people have made with earrings, looking at shapes and how things hang one in front of another, or maybe hanging multiple pieces going down. So thinking about shape, layers, textures, which we'll talk about later. But I would have my students play around in their sketchbook, come up with different designs, kind of finalize what they want to do. And I think the more time students put into planning and experimenting in their sketchbook, the higher quality and more interesting products you get in the end. But before they can do that, they really need exposure to what is possible. So we'll do Google searches, or I have books that I'll have kids look at. I'll bring in samples of my work or other kids' work from my classes in previous years. But they're going to spend some time designing. Once they figured out what they want to make, or if you're making these, what you want to make, your next step is you've got to go into your metal, and I use the back side, and I'm going to draw with a Sharpie the shapes that I'm going to cut out. I did some pretty simple shapes for this tutorial. You could do much more complicated forms if you want to. One of the things that I talk about with my students in my metals class or with this project is really using your sheet of metal intelligently. Art teachers, you know the pain of coming across a beautiful piece of paper with a circle cut right out of the center. It's the same concept with metal. This metal is not expensive, but when we use copper and brass in my metals class, that is expensive metal, and we don't want to waste it. We want as little scrap as possible. So I'll spend some time talking about doing things like this. If there's a shared straight edge, you can put that edge there. The benefit to this is when they're cutting with a jeweler's saw and like with real metal, there's one less cut. Putting things as close to the edge as you can, grouping and things like that. Once they've traced their metal in a good spot, your next step is just using your trusty scissors, and it won't dull it. You're going to cut those shapes out. The trick with this is when you cut, just like, you know, when you teach kids to cut out a paper, you want to roll, if you've got a curved edge, you want to roll your scissors with the cut, because you want one nice smooth cut. And that'll make sure that your piece isn't sharp for somebody who's wearing it, because we don't want to make jewelry that's going to cut someone. That's not ideal. So you just focus when they're cutting their shapes out on one smooth cut. Another thing to note is if you're just having kids make one pair of earrings, you would not have to have each kid have their own, like their own soda can. So if you're pre-cutting and they're making one piece of jewelry, you could cut the can into sections and give each kid like a sheet like this. So you could probably get 3 sections per can, which would cut down your time if you're pre-cutting. So I've cut my shape out. My next step is I have this piece of cardboard here. It's just scrap cardboard from I don't know, some Amazon box I've gotten while I've been home because I got spend way too much time on Amazon the last couple of months. If you wanted to just focus on shape and some really simple projects, maybe this is the end of where things are, and you have kids use a pin. I'm using an awl. They poke a hole in their piece, they string it up, and they're done. Okay, there's their earring. Or maybe they make multiple of these and layer them up and make a really awesome necklace with a ton of pieces like this. So you can keep the metal flat. You could also turn it and use the colored side of the metal. A little more interesting if you're thinking about using maybe some of the graphics on the front side. So maybe instead of tracing my design on the back, I'd trace it on the front, really paying attention to what's going on around it. But what I think is fun with this project, where I found the most enjoyment myself in making these pieces, is playing around with different techniques for texture and color. And I think that's where the lesson gets truly interesting. So I want to spend some time talking about that with you. So if you look at this earring, see if I'll move it a little bit so you can see. I have embossed this earring with line and this earring with these little circles and lines around it. And then I've used Sharpie to add some color. On this earring, I folded the metal into kind of a fan shape, and then I embossed the back with some texture. So I want to show you guys how to do this. And this is where I think you can get some really valuable metals, like basic metals understanding for your students. I think this is an appropriate project to work with the soda can, depending on your students and how much time you put into safety, maybe 5th through 12th grade. Below 5th grade, I'd modify it a little bit more. But I think 5th through 12th grade, you could do this depending again on your students better than I do, what's going to work for you. So let's talk a little bit about textures. So this is where it gets kind of fun. I've got all sorts of different pieces here I've prepped for you guys. And I'll talk you through some of the more interesting textures. So the first one I'm going to show you is this texture. And this is just using a hard surface, a hard textured surface, and I rub on that surface. So I have this little shell that was just sitting in my studio. I have no idea why. I'm guessing many of you have those types of things in your studio as well. I hold my metal over my shell, and then I'm using the end of my awl. You need students to use like some hard wooden object. They could get a wooden spoon from their kitchen, and you wouldn't have to use a shell. Again, any hard surface that has a texture, when you rub it, it's going to transfer to the metal. So if I rub against that shell, you can see that that texture starts to transfer. And then I turn it. I'm going to rub in a different direction because why not? And I keep turning, rub, turn, rub, turn. And you can see how it's picked up that texture. So right now you're teaching your students to emboss, and you can emboss in metals by rubbing on a surface. Metalsmiths use what's called a rolling mill. So they put a hard texture surface that's flat, they put their metal over it, they run it through 2 rollers, and that presses the texture into the surface as well. So you can rub texture into your metal. You can also emboss it with a sharp tool. So on this guy, kind of see it's faceted a little bit. So for this guy, what I did is I took my triangle earring, and on one side, I took my awl, and I don't want to go straight up and down because my awl is really sharp. I'm just doing a series of lines in a variety of directions, and I push pretty hard. I do it on this cardboard because there needs to be some give underneath that metal. If you don't have, or students don't have an awl, the other thing you can use is a pencil, which most students have at home. I can take a pencil and emboss as well and push in different directions. And then I just did the same from the back side, just have some lines that kind of push out instead of just in. And once you do that, you can see you kind of have that faceted surface, which is pretty fun. This piece, you can't see the texture as much. It's more subtle, kind of rustic. This one, I just took my pliers and I used the handle end, and I used it like a hammer. If you're at school and you have a ball peen hammer, students should do this with a ball peen hammer. But I'm at home. I'm sure I have a ball peen hammer somewhere, but my students might not. So I found a tool that was hard and slightly rounded on the end. And I just hammer my metal. And as I do that, you can see that starting to pull up a surface as well. This technique that you can see on this guy, this one's maybe my favorite one to do with the tin can. And it's a scoring and kind of folding technique. And it takes just a hair more time. So the first thing I did is I cut a circle, and then on my stencil, the circle on the stencil has little marks at the center of each side. So I marked the center, and then I took a straight edge, and the straight edge doesn't have to be a ruler. And so I always tell students that when they're at home, anything that's straight, you know, this is straight, the edge of a notebook is straight, can be a straight edge. I'm going to take a sharper tool. So this could be a pin, it could be a sharp pencil. In my case, it's an awl. I'm going to go down. I've lined up my two marks. I'm going to hold it tight. I just pushed a little too hard. And push down. And then I'm lining up another mark with my halfway point on the side. I'm going to push down. I'm going to do the same on the other halfway point. And then I'll show you what you got to do to make it fan. So to kind of go every other way. So you can see here I've got 3 lines that I've embossed pushing down in this direction. Then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to find the halfway point between 2 of the embossed lines. And I'm going to emboss on the back side now, pushing down. And on my other piece, my other circle, which has disappeared, there it is. I've got too much on my desk. On this piece, you can see there's quite a few of the up and downs. I'm going to stop here just for the sake of time. You can see that I've got a few lines. Now, all you have to do is just gently fold where the line pushes out. You're going to fold out a little bit. And you want to take it slow. And where the line pushes in, you'll push in a little bit. And then backwards, and I'm also using my fingernail to kind of push it out, but you can see that that's starting to make those folds. Doing this in aluminum is relatively easy, and that's why I like it. I can show my students a metals technique that in 18 gauge copper is a little trickier, because we would have to take a file and we'd have to file a channel on each of these places in order to fold it. But with this, I can just score a line and fold, and I can do some really nice has some really nice depth and movement to my pieces. So you can kind of see how that works. That one I think is one of my very, very favorite techniques to play with. What I also like about this project is because it's low stakes, it's just aluminum from a soda can, you can get multiple pieces out of one soda can. There's a lot of room for experimentation in the work. For example, this morning as I was getting things together, I tried embossing like a leaf pattern onto this piece, and I just didn't like, it didn't come out quite as deep as I wanted to. And then I did some color work over it, and I just couldn't see the leaves really well. So I'm like, well, what would happen if I scraped into the leaves? So you can kind of see it catching the light there a little bit. I used my awl after I added the color to kind of scratch into the surface and give some more detail, kind of like a sgraffito, but on the metal. And I always encourage my students to play around with their art and to try different things and see what happens. And I think this is a really good project to experiment with. So maybe before you make any earrings, you have the kids cut, squares out of their aluminum can and just play with the techniques and see what they can do and what happens with the metal. And after they've experimented, then they design and make a final product. Again, easy to do with aluminum because it's low stakes and it's so fast. Like, I think I did all my samples in like a half hour this morning, from cutting the can to finishing the shapes and working into them. And when I did my video, I made more earrings than I show in my video because some of them were duds, which is also a good lesson for students, right? That like not every piece of art is gonna be amazing. Some of them are duds, and that is okay. So again, low stakes way to play with metals, easy to do at home because most students have these, or at least some of these materials at home, or they can find something that would work. So it's really fun to play with. Now, the last thing I want to show you with these earrings, other than modifications that you can make, is how to play with color on the metal. So I was noticing earlier this year, some artists, some jewelry artists that I follow had some really kind of cool colors happening on their metals jewelry. And so I sent one a message like, how did you make that color? It's not enamel, like there wasn't a thickness to it. It was clearly like a color on a surface. And they're like, oh, it's alcohol inks. And I have other artist friends that play with alcohol inks on paper and things like that, but I hadn't heard of people using it on metal. And so I thought, you know, this silver soda can thing's cool. Like the backside's kind of cool, but it'd be nice to have color on this. And how could we do that at home? Most of my students don't have alcohol ink. I don't have alcohol ink at home. I do now, by the way. I didn't then. So what might they have at home that they could replicate alcohol ink with on their metals and add a little color? Because what I do know about my students and most people is they like color, right? It's fun. So I started to play around and experiment a little bit, and I discovered that Sharpie on the aluminum with either acetone or rubbing alcohol acts like alcohol ink because it's an alcohol-based ink. And with that, I was able to add some really interesting color and kind of play a little bit more with the metal. So let me kind of show you how that works, okay? So here's my handy dandy cardboard again. And I recommend working on cardboard or some kind of surface to soak up the rubbing alcohol. There's a lot of different ways that you can make the different color on your metal work. And you can see I've worked with, you know, this is oranges and yellows. It's really subtle on that metal. This one is actually the black Sharpie looks purple once you've had alcohol ink. So this one's purple and pinks. I've got some greens and yellows. You can really play with color. And if all you have for a Sharpie is a black Sharpie, honestly, it works really nice. So this guy is, I put black Sharpie around the edge. So I wanted it to just kind of fade in. And one thing when I showed this to my students, when we talked about things online, is when you're doing this with the, if you're going to play with the Sharpie and rubbing alcohol or acetone, acetone's just nail polish remover, and a lot of students have nail polish remover around their house. One of the tricks is you really kind of have to let it do its thing, kind of like watercolor. So I put black Sharpie around the edge. This is a bottle of rubbing alcohol. It's got a spray nozzle on it, which is kind of nice. I'm just going to spray it, and as that's wet, the rubbing alcohol, or I'm sorry, the Sharpie is going to start to bleed out into the design a little bit. And if I want it to do certain things, I can also pick it up and I can tilt it so it starts to run into the design. If I don't like what I did, you can use the rubbing alcohol to rub off your design. If you're like, ooh, that did not turn out, you can use that rubbing alcohol to rub the design right off. One of the things that I like to do with this is, you know, kind of messy work. I didn't try to control things too much, although you could experiment with it. So I would just kind of scribble Sharpie in there, and then I'd get another color and I'd scribble a little bit of that color in. And then you could either do, you know, I sprayed the rubbing alcohol. You could drip the acetone on it as well. That's a little tricky, honestly, to drip acetone. From what I found, I tried using a toothpick to drip little drops, but it evaporates so quickly that it's kind of a tricky thing to do. So I just really carefully put some in a cap, and I drop a little bit. Oh, it ran right down the side. This is like those moments in class when you do a demo and it doesn't work quite right. There we go. And I'll just let it cool and do its thing. I also found if I used an X-Acto knife, something that has like a bit of a surface, I could drop that in and I could drop a little bit more on. There we go. When you've got a pile of it on here too, you can kind of move it around and draw with it. But again, this is me experimenting, right? And that's what I want my students to do. So I'll experiment a little bit, just enough to show them like, hey, this is something you can work with, see what you can do with it. And then as I let that sit, the ink is dissolving. And again, if I want to control it a little bit, I can tip it and I can cause a drip. But I like to just let it dry and do its thing. And I think you get more interesting effects with that alcohol and the ink if you just let it dry and do its thing. On this piece here, on the purple, I kind of wanted to do a bloom technique a little bit. So after the ink had dried, I got a little Q-tip. I took the cotton off. I dipped it in the alcohol and I dropped just little drops, and they kind of pushed the rubbing out or the ink away, and it got a little bit of a bloom effect to it, which I thought was pretty cool. So again, just lots of experimenting there to see what can happen. Knowing that people are going to be a little anxious about using metal, especially with younger kids, and having them work with this at home potentially, or even in the classroom when you've got 30 kids in a classroom that you're trying to monitor. One thing that I thought might be a good switch out for you is, instead of using metal, you can do a lot of the same stuff, not the alcoholic stuff, but talking about design and shape and even embossing, using cardboard from like a cereal box. So this is actually cardboard from a Sprecker's soda. If you haven't had Sprecker's soda, it's really good. Sprecker's soda box. So it's thin, just like the cardboard from a cereal box. And I made a design, cut it out on the back, and then on this one, I put it on the cardboard and I embossed it with a pencil, and then I painted it pink with acrylic paint. On this one, I embossed it with a toothpick, and it worked a little bit better because you could see the pencil. You see the pencil more than you see the embossing. So if you wanted to try cardboard instead of the metal, you could, and you can still do the embossing and talk about embossing. You can still pop a hole in these and hang them from stuff. If you want them to last longer, you can always put Mod Podge front and back, coat front, let it dry, flip, coat on the back, let it dry. Otherwise, this is pretty, handy. I wouldn't wear it in the rain, but it should last pretty well. Once kids have their textures, their colors, all that done, the next step is assembling it. There's a few things that you're going to want to note for assembly. So right now, and you could actually do this before the texture, here's one of my square earrings. It's got kind of sharp corners. And one of the things we talk about in jewelry design is you need to make something wearable. You do not want to injure your customer or your mom or your grandma who you give these to. So with something like this, I would just have kids come in and slightly round the corner. And now it's not going to be an issue. If it moves on the head, it's not going to poke you and cut you. So just rounding any sharp corners at this point. And then we need to poke holes and stuff. So this is where I use my awl, I use my cardboard, I figure out where I want the hole, and I just push. Again, super easy to do that with the thumbtack. If a kid has a thumbtack at home, you can even poke through with a toothpick. And it'll pop through. A toothpick will also pop the hole bigger if you need to. So let's say they did it with a pin and they can't get anything through the hole, just pop a toothpick in there, kind of push through. It'll open up that hole a little bit bigger. At this point, once you have those holes in there, you're going to put it on an ear wire. For those of you who are unsure, this is an ear wire. The bottom, you twist it open and you can string the pieces onto that. Nasco does sell ear wires in a pretty large quantity. I know they're hypoallergenic. I can't remember if they're stainless steel or sterling silver. I'm guessing stainless steel. I'm like 90% certain, and I'm sure that Kris can clarify that. But Nasco does sell ear wires. You could also have kids just use string. They might have embroidery floss at home or hemp string at home. They could take apart, they've got old jewelry that's cheap that their parents say, yeah, you can take that apart. They can take apart an old piece of jewelry, use that to reassemble things. But at that point, then it's time to assemble and put things together. And the same would be true if you're going to do cardboard. You poke a hole through it, same way, and then assemble however you want to assemble, whatever your project entails. My kids, when they did this at home, didn't have ear wires, so some of them did reassemble earrings, or they went to Goodwill and they purchased like $1 earrings, took off the stuff that was with them and put it back on. So there's a lot of ways that kids can put this together at home if you don't have ear wires to give to them. I've talked about a few modifications that you could make for younger kids or kids that you're a little bit more concerned about safety with. So there's the cardboard option, which takes the metal out completely, but you can still do the basic lesson. And then you can paint or color on it with whatever you want, or have them use the graphic side of it for like a little more pop arty feel. You can pre-cut the soda cans for your students to take out that step, which is the sharpest step. And again, you can either give kids a full sheet, or I think you could cut this into thirds, and 1 can for every 3 kids would probably get you a pair of earrings pretty easily, as long as they weren't humongous. So those are 2 modifications for younger kids or kids that you have safety concerns about. Some modifications for older kids or kids that are a little bit more advanced is to take this, like, level it up a little bit, right? So maybe instead of saying, hey, we're all gonna make earrings, you say, hey, we're gonna make art out of soda cans. Here's some earrings, here's some basic information, but I want you to think outside the box. What else could you make out of these? And some things that I've thought of is you could do some pretty awesome mobiles with the aluminum, and, you know, putting texture and color into it and hanging it from, you know, sticks you find outside. You could make some really interesting and I think really beautiful kind of 2D, 3D wall art pieces. So layering the cans kind of in front of each other and creating almost like a little shadow box, like tunnel book kind of feel with the aluminum. I think that could be really interesting, and you could space it out using cardboard behind it, and use color and texture to do some pretty awesome stuff. You could have kids look at avant-garde jewelry, some things that are really out there that if you were to make it out of bronze or copper would be maybe a bit price prohibitive for most of us in school. You can have them make it out of aluminum and do some crazy stuff that is more art sculpture that one wears and less practical jewelry that one wears. You could have kids set up like an online shop to sell these, and that gets a little tricky. So you definitely want to talk with your principal if that's an okay thing to do or how to go about doing that. If it were like a typical school year and we weren't in the midst of COVID and those concerns, I think this would be a great project for like an art club to do to raise some money, because it's relatively inexpensive and people like earrings. And if you can sell some earrings for like $5–10 a pair, I think they'd sell pretty quick. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this and lessons that you can teach kids beyond, you know, going outside the project bounds to how to sell art or raise money using art, what's appealing to people visually, all those kinds of things. I just think there's a lot of options if we're willing to think outside the box, and I really encourage you to do that with this. It's such an easy material to work with. You cut it with regular scissors. Fun to play with the textures and the folding and the color. I really enjoyed it myself as an artist, and exploring something new with my students. I had students make lawn art. Somebody made a big flower and attached it to a stake, and put it out in their yard. I had a student do like this wacky, like they took a big soda can, like a taller than average one, and they made little drawers that pulled in and out of it. So it was like a little jewelry container thing. There's some cool ideas online that kids could look at to get inspired by. There's a lot of different ways you could go with this one, both as an artist yourself or with your students, whatever works for you. If you want to watch the video for this, it's on Angie Szabo Designs on YouTube. It's 15 minutes long. It goes over everything I went over with you, with some pretty thorough descriptions. So it'd be good for you, it'd be good for your students to watch if it's helpful. but that is the
Angie,
project. Yeah.
the video, all that is referenced in your outstanding handout. Like you guys, this handout real good. You're going to be real impressed. So on the side of your panel, there's a spot that says handouts, and it says Soda Can Jewelry Lesson. Click on that, download that, and you'll get Angie, all of Angie's information and this lesson, beautiful pictures. But I definitely recommend watching the video as well. And I apologize for cutting you off on that, but the handout's so good, I don't want anybody to miss it.
Thanks, Kris. I used a template in Pages on my Mac. I love that program.
Oh my gosh, no, it's fantastic. Angie, a couple questions, and we are just rolling. Excellent commercial for Sprecher Soda, by the way. That was super Wisconsin, and they
You're welcome.
called. They would like you to sponsor them. So a couple of the questions was that hold up your green template. The sort of stencily template.
The stencils?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So Nasco sells them as well. You can probably get them from anywhere, but I think they're very classic mapped helix. And yes, so that was one question that somebody had about that. The next question is all about the alcohol and not the kind that you drink, but alcohol, that one says 91%. Does 70% work?
I would assume so, because sometimes that 91% works more than I want it to. So it might be nice to have it at a lower percentage. Yeah.
Interesting. I know that it's slower because welcome to COVID, where it's really hard to find alcohol, period. Right. Everybody's using that in homemade hand sani and stuff like that. So the acetone is the question I had. That works just like the alcohol.
Yep, for Sharpie at least. I haven't tried it with alcohol inks, but acetone is a,
But as long as we're talking about alcohol, do you allow students to use beer cans?
When we were doing this, I probably wouldn't have them bring it in to school, but when we were doing stuff online at home, and if that's what their parents had, they used it because that was the material they had available. If they wanted to, like, let's say this was my earring and this said Budweiser instead of Squirt, and they wanted it to be like, but I probably, that would have been a no, right?
Right.
But if they were using it just as material and their parents were okay with it, fine. Right. Bringing it into school, no. Having it be obvious that, it's advertising a beer or whatever, or White Claw. White Claw is like the thing people are, right? Like
seltzer. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My son sells beer for a living, and so yeah, that White Claw is a big deal right now.
Yeah. I just wouldn't want it to be a visible part of it. But when we were struggling to find materials for kids to work from home, if that's what they had and their parents were cool with them using the can, not the alcohol, then I was going to be okay with that because we just needed things to work with.
Understandable. And I think that's just a good thing to point out. Work with your school rules, work with your family set of rules. And it's just a question I know would come up. Also, too, when you talk about ideas and sketchbooks and stuff, I know as a student, a lot of times I see something and I want to do it. And I think that's natural in art. So talk a little bit about, like, if somebody saw Khloe Kardashian's earrings and then that's what they're going to make out of their pop can. Talk a little bit about appropriation. That's right. That's the right word, right?
Yes, it is. That's a tricky one, right? Like we all know that's a little tricky. I'm pretty clear with my students, at least, that they need to come up with their own designs. The process of looking at something, saying, I like it, I want to make it, and then making it doesn't make it yours. It's still the other, you know, somebody else spent time designing that and thinking about it. So we'll say they saw a pair of earrings by Khloe Kardashian. What I would do with that student or any other students like, I want to make SpongeBob, is I would say, let's take a look at that earring, or let's take a look at the SpongeBob characters. What do you like about the earring? You know, maybe it's the shape. Okay, well, let's think about those shapes. How could we use them in different ways? How could you combine them in a different way? Maybe it's the layers, or that there's multiple things hanging down. What could you do with different shapes or different layers? So how can you take that and be inspired by it? Or, you know, I have some students that are really into whatever character from a series, or whatever series or game, and they want to make a scene from that game or a character from that series. What I usually say is, okay, you love that series. I want you to pretend you're a designer. I want you to pretend that you are somebody that works in character development for this company, and I want you to design a new character that fits within the world of this series. So that way they're still able to connect to this thing that they really love, but they're creating something novel for it. So that's kind of how I handle the appropriation, like be inspired by, but do not copy.
Awesome, and I appreciate that. And I know everybody has their own set of, you know, do you let them copy, that kind of stuff. I just wanted to hear your take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk just a tiny bit how to change it from earrings to like a necklace?
Sure. So, and this is,
this is, you know, the universal spot for a necklace right here. Earrings to a necklace.
So typically, like in my classroom, I would take a jump ring, which is a circular piece of wire, and you twist it open. And for jump rings, you always twist open, you never pull open. And you put the jump ring into that hole, and then you would string the jump ring onto whatever string that you have available. If kids are working from home and you haven't been able to give them a kit with things like jump rings in it, and they don't have pliers available to them, if you make the hole in the object large enough, they could tie a string through it. And then, and of course, I do not have a string handy. You tie a string through it, and then you tie a knot right above it, and then it would hang off of that string. And that would be a way to transition it to a necklace. So just use that same hole, maybe open it up a little bit and get some string through there, tie above, and then let it come off from that. That would be the easiest way to transition into a necklace, other than jump rings, which I know not everyone has.
Yeah, I'd have to go with that string method myself. So I just learned something new, and I'm excited to, I didn't know that knot part of it. Like, that's the secret sauce. That's so great.
Yeah, I wish I had. I'm looking in my studio.
Have you ever used a license plate? Is that harder aluminum?
Oh yeah, that's much. A license plate is much thicker. I think you'd need to have a saw, or you'd need to have like tin snips to work with that.
Gotcha.
And you'd probably end up having to file and sand the edges, because I think with it being thicker, if you're snipping it with a tin snips, you're gonna get a rough, sharp edge. But it's doable. You could make some pretty awesome, like, maybe not jewelry, but like lawn art and sculptural pieces out of
stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't wreck scissors. You mentioned something about when you are cutting the pop can, it won't ruin anybody's scissors. Don't use your fabric scissors, right?
Yeah. Well, I think people that have fabric scissors and using them on fabric are pretty like, this is only for fabric.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I have these, which I got at Nasco a long time ago. They're matte stainless steel scissors. I really like them. And it's not any duller for cutting. It's so thin that it doesn't dull the scissors. You know, I wouldn't cut metal much thicker than that with something like scissors, but your typical soda can is pretty thin.
I did watch Angie's video when she first came out with it and played with the pop can, and I so just need my art teacher, you know, right there telling me what to do. But it was super fun, and it was super duper cool. I had 70% alcohol, and it just seemed, it didn't work as fast, and it might be my patience level as well. But her instructions are outstanding on that video, much like what you saw here. couple other things before we run out of time. I just wrote a couple notes. The earring, the hooks that Nasco sells are called surgical steel earring hooks. So I'm assuming surgical steel means you can put them through your ear hole and it will be safe. I also liked how you talked, I liked how you talked about the safety part of it. There's a little bit of a less controlled environment in a home situation. And I know that it almost sounds like there should be more of a controlled environment, but obviously parents aren't well versed on art safety and things like that. So I think that's an excellent thing to talk about as you do online teaching, is where you're set up and what your surroundings are in case something spills, or the remnants from stuff. That was excellent advice, and thank you for that.
Yeah, with that, Kris, as I'm preparing to teach metals and clay online and in person at the same time, one of the things that I have to think about, and many of us have to think about, is our kids working from home. So can everyone see me right now, Kris?
Yep.
Okay, I did not know. This is my studio. Do you guys see the big piles of ice cream buckets sitting along my floor? Okay, so I put a call out to my community because I need to be able to send clay stuff home with my students, and I needed to be able to like make a little kit for them. And so I said, hey, I need 38 ice cream buckets. I now have like 50 ice cream buckets and had to delete every post that I put out there because more people were like, oh, I have 20 ice cream buckets for you. And I was like, who saves 20 ice cream buckets? Like, that's not me.
Why are you so skinny?
Yes, true. So I've got these ice cream buckets. You know, I'm thinking about my kids working at home with clay, which we're going to do. I'm going to send clay home. How do I make sure their parents don't get mad at them for making a mess with clay? So I'm trying to think about what materials do I need to send home to make sure they can keep it contained. So I'm going to get 2 big garbage bags per kid, one to put on their work surface and one to put on the floor underneath them. Encourage them not to work on carpet. When they're done working for the day, they fold the garbage bag. I'm going to teach them to fold that garbage bag in, take it outside, shake it out, well, maybe not shake it out. Gently brush it because we don't want to get clay dust in the air. And then the same with the one at the feet, trying to keep their house clean. So really having to think about things that we wouldn't typically think about in the art room. And as we build kits to send kids home, sometimes we have to send things we wouldn't think about with them as well. Same with my metals kits that I'm building. I'm adding things to their toolboxes to make sure they have like the basic metals equipment they have. But I just wanted to talk quickly about that at-home side of things.
Yes, thank you very much. Love that. And that the safety factor, I think, has been an absolute fantastic tip. I also thank you very much for all the video tips at the beginning and just how you got started. I like how you said, you know, we're all in this together and we help each other out, because there's so much truth to that. Even in these Maker Mondays, I've appreciated people that have shared something that they've done to differentiate, or have come back later and shared. And by all means, utilize our Facebook page, Nasco Art Education, to share some of the things that you've done from these Maker Mondays. We love to see that. And with that, you know, what people don't know about you too, Angie, is that you came to Fort Atkinson High School after somebody who had taught for a very, very long time and had done amazing stuff, but you also met students where they were at in terms of creating coursework and curriculum that was very relevant and current and exciting, and have built the program up. And Fort Atkinson's a small town, and you do a fantastic job. Thank you so, so much for being here today. You're always a pleasure to deal with and work with, and I consider you one of my personal art teachers because I can go to you all the time. So thank you very much. Please, everybody, know that in 1 hour, approximately in 1 hour, you're going to get a follow-up email. It'll have a survey. Please answer any of the questions that you feel would help us. It has a PD certificate that you can download. It has the recorded webinar that you can rewatch anytime. If you missed this session and friends want to know how to get it, it will be housed on our K-to-Career Resource Center called Nasco Educate. It's a subscription-based platform that has all kinds of information that's continuing to grow information. You can get a 2-week trial. Feel free to shoot me an email, kbakke@nascoeducation.com, or put it in response to the email that you get. Next week is Lakota Mosi from Arizona on cardboard art. Again, fabulous for online teaching because everybody has cardboard. So Angie, thank you so much. We'll definitely be working together again. Everybody, please continue to stay safe, be happy, and just keep teaching art.